All righty. Well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Thanks for coming back. Kicking off the afternoon, I am Monty Shaw, IRFA's Executive Director. On this panel this afternoon, we're hopefully going to answer all of your burning questions when it comes to the new political landscape after the recent election and realignment in D.C., and I've been assured by our panelists that they know the specific and unchanging answers to all of your questions. Unlike those people in the morning who kept saying everything's uncertain. No, but seriously, we'll dig in and we'll try to figure out as best we can where things are headed and what might influence those decisions. I was supposed to be introducing Joe Gilson with the American Farm Bureau Federation, but unfortunately he and his entire family got rather ill over the weekend, and we encouraged him not to get on an airplane for the sake of all the rest of the people on the airplane. So first of all, what do I got here? Okay, I got Devin over here. So Devin Mogler, some of you might recognize him from his recent stint at Green Plains, the ethanol producer with 2 plants in Iowa. But he very recently took on the role as president and CEO of the National Oilseed Processors Association, known as NOPA, right? NOPA, okay. Devin previously, as I mentioned, was at Green Plains, and for 7 years doing all of their policy development and advocacy. And before that, he was a policy advisor for Iowa Senator Joni Ernst, and it actually started out not only on a farm, but with a farm cooperative. So brings lots of different perspectives to this. Also joining us is Anthony Reed, a partner with FGS Global, where he holds a diverse portfolio of clients, including 2 of his bosses are on the stage. I'll let him decide whether he wants to tell you which ones. And food, agriculture, energy, sustainability. Prior to that, Anthony has spent 14 years on the government relations team at ADM. You previously had worked for then Iowa Representative Tom Latham, if I remember correctly.
My first job on Capitol Hill.
Your first job. So we trained him right, and he went on to big and better things. We're very proud of that. Now, sitting next to me, filling in, is Kevin Studer. So I teased him. I said, we have our panel of DC experts and Kevin. No, but seriously, Kevin actually is with the Iowa Corn Growers Association. You just got a promotion not too long ago, so I have to make sure I get this right. You're the Vice President of Government Relations. You've been with Iowa Corn 7 years. Prior to that, he was at USDA, so he was a government bureaucrat. I tease him. For 20 years, he's got a gold coin to prove. Is it really gold or not really? Just gold color?
I wish it was gold.
All right, so it's just a fake gold coin. Before that, he spent time cutting his teeth on the Hill with Senator Chuck Grassley, and you're out there often, so he's pretty plugged into what's going on in D.C. And then finally, on my far left, you're right, returning to the stage, our industry keynote speaker from this morning, Clean Fuels Alliance America's CEO, Danelle Rehagen. So Danelle, thanks for being back and taking some more punishment. So I've got a whole bunch of really good questions, so I'm probably going to ignore yours, but just in case somebody has a good one, there are these QR codes around the room. Scan those in, submit your questions, and we'll try to fit in those as we can. So we're gonna dive into it. For the icebreaker, when we were having our pre-summit call, I said, hey, they asked, what's the stage look like? What's going on? Is there a table? I said, nope, it's just chairs and there's no skirts, so wear good socks. So as you can see, I'm sporting the uber spiffy green IRFA edition sock here. So Danelle, did you take up the challenge?
I did.
Look at that, clean fuel socks. I like it. Hey, maybe we could swap out a pair so I could get
Different
one of yours.
pairs, but yes.
Well, not these pairs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not these pairs.
No problem
But
then.
now, Kevin, you missed that call, so maybe you get a pass. But how's your sock game today?
They're warm.
They're warm?
Yep,
Okay, that's good.
Mine aren't a solid color, and that's a big deal for me.
Practical, solid color. Okay, so button down guy. And Devin, we know we could count on you.
They're red, they're blue, that's Democrat, Republican, it's bipartisan.
All right, there we go.
Bipartisan
See?
socks.
So I should have wore purple, I guess. We should do purple socks. No, but seriously, let's jump in because there's a ton of issues facing our industry. It seems like that's not been untrue any of the 19 years we've done this. And right now, whenever you have a transition from one administration to the next, there's always a period of uncertainty, a period of change, and this one might be as big or as interesting as any of them. So we're just going to jump in. Anthony, I talked this morning about E15 being so close it hurt physically when that didn't happen. Why do you think the E-15 was pulled out of the December CR? Is it some powerful forces behind the scenes that we can't grapple with, or were we just a victim of procedure?
No, it was a victim of procedure. I mean, I think it's been.
So my conspiracy theories are all bogus.
Yes, for now, for now at least, anyway. So after a whole bunch of stuff was in that bill at the end of the year, and Elon Musk sent a tweet saying, "Look at all these pages that are on here that have nothing to do with government funding," and there was a huge backlash against the bill, and so literally everything that didn't really have any direct impact on funding got stripped out of the bill. So a lot of the policy provisions, the E-15 was just one of the many that were in the package, got stripped out, and so there's going to be another bite at the apple here coming in March. I too have gotten very close on this, maybe 7 or 8 years ago too. So just keeping at it. That's all we can do.
Do the rest of you agree it was just a victim of procedure, or anybody want to join the conspiracy theory club?
No conspiracy theory.
No, just procedure.
I think it was just public backlash. You tweet a picture of a bill that's this tall versus one that's this.
And there was some really
Yeah.
not good things that had gotten put in there, or at least hard to explain. I'll put it that way. Hard to explain to the voters.
There you go.
So Kevin, E-15. So he mentioned we'll have another bite of the apple. What's your take on, so the continuing resolution that they passed to fund the government in December goes through March 15th, middle of March, somewhere in there. They'll have to do something, CR, other types of funding mechanisms. What's your take? Will E-15 be in the March CR?
I believe it will. As you said, Monty, we both have received commitments from the Iowa delegation at the end when the speaker pulled it out that they verbally committed to the Iowa delegation that it would be back in the package from whatever package that might be, whether that was in reconciliation or the continuing funding resolution in March. And we all probably know on this panel that to probably get E-15 in a reconciliation tax package would be a very tough haul. So I'm being very optimistic that the easy path will be to put it in the funding resolution in March. And I believe that with President Trump's E-15 executive order that came out when he was in the Oval Office during his first 24 hours, that is going to send a signal to Capitol Hill that the president would like to see this get accomplished.
All right. Any other thoughts on that, March CR?
Yeah, I think the reconciliation is the big thing. It's got to go in some of the funding packages because just budget rules, the way the reconciliation works, it can't really go in the reconciliation bill. So it's got to be one of these funding bills. So whether the can gets kicked or whether they actually do it, whenever that actually happens, I think there's a good chance.
Okay. Danelle, does in the biomass-based diesel world that you work primarily in, is there an E-15 equivalent, something that's important that's been stalled for decades, or what is that like burning issue for you guys?
Well, I think, Monty, it's been more, not necessarily one issue. We've benefited, the industry's benefited immensely from the blender's tax credit. That was 20 years ago this year, and so it really did make a difference to build this industry out. I'd hate to guess where we would be today without that, and so we went through years of on and off, and that was always a struggle. RVOs are the foundational policy. I mentioned that this morning and the struggles with that. So it's not really one thing that I would say is our equivalent to that. It's just when can we find some consistency in those policies that we can look at a year ahead or 2 or 3 years ahead, ideally, where we don't have something big like that that's staring back at us.
Okay. Devin, and I'm asking to maybe stretch back to your prior jobs and experience, but your time on the Hill. If, let's just say that Lucy once again pulls the football away from my Charlie Brown E-15 nationwide fix, and it does not end up in a March CR, and now we're staring at a summer, May they got to have fuel and thing in the pipeline, June it's got to be in the gas stations. Kevin mentioned the Trump executive order, that they'd look at it. Do you think that's something that the biofuels industry can take to the bank, that the EPA will consider that and look for ways to try to do an emergency order if they can? Or what's your thoughts on if we don't get the March CR solution?
Well, I don't think you can ever take anything to the bank in Washington, D.C., especially not in Trump's Washington. But we've been able to sell E-15 year-round through emergency waiver or other means for 6 summers now. Yeah. And so I don't think this administration is going to be the first one to take that away. particularly when they won election based on grocery store prices, on fuel prices, and all of that. You're not going to take away the most affordable option at the pump. So I think the odds are very good that even if it weren't included in a congressional package, that it could be done through emergency waiver, and I think there would be an impetus to do that, but it doesn't mean you can let off the gas on asking for it.
Anthony, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think what to layer on the E15 executive order that was mentioned, they couldn't say that they were going to do it, right? Because you can't predetermine the outcome of what's an emergency. But also an executive order was the national energy emergency, which underlies kind of everything that the administration is doing on energy. So they've kind of already pre-signaled that there's a national energy emergency as we speak. So they've kind of already pre-laid the groundwork to say there is an emergency that requires the waivers to continue.
That's an interesting point. I'm unencumbered with a legal education, so I haven't looked into this. There are certain criteria, in theory, that you have to see in order to justify an emergency waiver under the ones that have been done in the past. With the new kind of more generic emergency power that Trump has claimed, does that open up new, different evaluations in addition to that, or is it still kind of what we're used to the last 3 years?
No, that's what we're used to. My assumption is that they'll just, when they do the justifications for the emergency waivers, they'll lay out that they'll use the EO, the executive order, as part of that to justify the need to continue to do it.
Kevin, are you optimistic as well?
I am. I'm probably one of the few that's very optimistic that I think they're going to want to get this behind them. I don't mean to be flippant, but I think Congress is kind of exhausted in dealing with this issue. And I know that I think we all are in this room, and I think there's a sentiment out there that they just want to get this behind them and move on.
Okay. Anthony, I mentioned it this morning, some other discussion I've had in the hallways. We were very excited when Governor Reynolds led a Midwest 8-state solution to this. Not only would it at a minimum keep E15 flowing, and this was, of course, we didn't know how the emergency waivers were going to go and different things. It keeps it flowing in the Midwest, but it puts pressure on a national fix because now all of a sudden you have one set of regulations here and others elsewhere. That has been requested. I mentioned in my remarks this morning. There are requests in by different refiners to delay that. Do you think that Trump would grant the petroleum ministry a request to delay the 8-state solution? And if they do you think that takes the pressure off of Congress to try to get a permanent fix done?
Yes and no. So yes, I think they would be inclined to delay another year. I think that would probably precipitate litigation potentially because there is a requirement that you know EPA has to do it. When the states ask, like there's not a lot of discretion to say no. So I think that would cause some litigation, which leads to the no part, which is I don't think it takes the pressure off the legislative thing. As Kevin and others have said, like they're still working on it, they're still talking about it. Everyone wants to get it behind them. So I think there's still the pressure to do that, and just because they delay again doesn't mean that it might not get litigated and be forced into action. So I think it keeps everybody at the table to say, all right, let's see this through to the end. That's my prediction.
Devin, any thoughts?
No? I agree with Anthony.
No.
Everybody?
I'm watching a little of this from the sidelines, of course, but certainly cheering you guys on. I mean, E15 has been an issue that's been sort of sucking a lot of oxygen out of the renewable fuels, space for a long time. So to get this behind it, which is good for you, I think it's good for the renewable fuels industry. And also, I think it's timely when you start thinking about setting RVOs. What are those impacts that E15 will have on ethanol demand that's not been considered historically? So I'm cheering this on. The sooner the better for you guys, and sooner the better, I think, for this whole conversation as RVOs are being discussed at the same exact time.
Yeah, was it you, Kevin? I agree. I think that the other people who are really wanting to get this behind them is our champions.
Yes.
I mean, we've been asking them to deliver, and when I say asking, I mean really asking them to deliver on this for literally over a decade. And they are as frustrated as we are. And I really feel like I had some conversations with them after the CR thing, and I said, it's not your fault, it's not our fault, but I think, just be ready when you come back because people are pissed. They're not pissed at you. Sorry, can I say that from the stage, Lisa? All right, I'm going to get kicked off. But people are upset that, and I think, we've been upset, but I think actually having it that close and then be yanked away, just people are like, that's it, I'm done. No more Iowa nice, as I said. So,
Bonnie, I think that's a testament again to your industry and the work that you all have put into to have a champion at that champions at that level that will stick with that long. I mean that says a lot about the work that you all have put into it. So congratulations on that.
and quite frankly, we need to clear their decks. I mean, you mentioned RVOs, we're going to jump to that next. Tax credits, there's other things that the industry needs, and this has just been something that's been out there for so long. So, Kevin, farmers need more demand. That was at least my message this morning.
Yep.
The renewable fuel standard could be a mechanism to do that. When will we see a proposal from the EPA? It's already late from the fall.
I think that if you watch the nomination hearings, Senator Grassley was very strong with EPA Administrator Zeldin now, who has been confirmed, of getting those RVOs out. And I think Administrator Zeldin heard the senator loud and clear on that, and I believe he will hold to his word that he was going to get those out this year, and I'll take him on his word on that. And I think it's our job at Corn Growers to hold his feet to the fire on those words, as we did with President Trump many years ago on a lot of ethanol policy.
Okay.
Timing to know, what do you think?
Well, as you may know, Clean Fuels filed litigation on this deadline portion of the RVOs, and so we have not yet begun that sit down with Department of Justice and EPA on that, but I mean, our intention there is to force the administration to move sooner. These RVOs were due last November. So a couple of months ago already, and so we can't afford, especially in light of everything up in the air about 45Z, also to then have the uncertainty of are we going to have RVOs January 1st of 2026. So we'll be pushing the accelerator on how quickly we can get them to move those final RVOs up.
Yeah, I mean, transition, new administration, but part two of a new administration, so not a super new administration, I guess. Did they get them out in the summer and then the fall last time, or what are you guys thinking this time?
Yeah, it was May and November 30th was the proposal and the final. So, and that was without a litigation suit. So, I mean, hat tip to Clean Fuels for immediately doing that, not knowing, what was going on, what was going to potentially happen. Well, we knew the election at that point, but to make sure that when the time came that lever was a tool that is at the industry's disposal to then force this on, because you don't want this. You don't want to be setting 26 RVOs in 26. It's just not. It's not good for certainty, especially if we want higher numbers.
So will we see May, November again?
I mean, it depends on the negotiation
That's right.
abilities of
All right,
the
write
Clean
this
Fuels
down.
lawyers.
It's all on Danelle. So, anything to add, or we're good? Okay.
No, I'll just mention, and I know we're probably going to get into this later, but it's a different Trump administration than last time. They're more organized. You'd think they'd be able to move things a little more quickly, and also the battle lines are different on the renewable fuels, the RVO fights, than they were 8 years ago. I mean, Donnell showed the slides earlier today of the rapid expansion in renewable diesel production, and most of that's being done by oil majors.
Yep.
And so I think the coalition that'll go in and ask for larger RVOs is going to look a lot different than it did in the first Trump administration.
Okay. Danelle, on these RVOs, so obviously we need to get them to act, but what they do is as important or more important. So EPA completely missed the boat last time on the advanced RVOs. I know there's no comfort in saying we told you so. I mean, some of the numbers that we suggested to them were eerily accurate in what we thought were going to happen. And they were not aggressive at all. Do you think, and maybe this ties a little bit off of what Devin kind of set me up here, that was good. Things are a little different. Different cast of characters are interested in advanced RVOs. So do we have a chance, but of course it's a different administration too, so do we have a chance for a more aggressive advanced RVO this time that might more accurately reflect what's going on in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think we actually do. For that reason, for the reason Devin mentioned there, it is a different constituency than what we had. In fact, we have folks on our side of this, higher RVOs, that were actually on the other side. They were opponents the last time around with President Trump, and so that, I think, is going to be extremely helpful. The EPA has admitted they missed the mark by a lot. I mean, we've had them publicly say that. They just said that at one of our membership meetings in November. And so that was good to hear them admit that. So I think that's also an indication that they realize there's some makeup room here for them. And we're going to present some really compelling data, as we always do, about where we're at. And so it's easier to look back on these last 3 years. That was our biggest issue going into set one with the EPA, is we could foretell this build out of renewable diesel that was coming online, and needed them to acknowledge that when they set those volumes. They did not do that. And so now looking back, they can see exactly the depth of the industry, the growth, and take that into consideration this time.
Kevin, anything you want to add?
I just want to clarify, if you gain gallons with the RVO, we've got to make sure that they're not taken away with SREs. So I just want everybody to know that the corn growers will be watching that like a hawk, that we might be giving gallons in one hand but taken away in the other. So I just want to clarify that we're going to be on top of that.
All right, we'll dig into that. I mean, Devin, you mentioned it's a different cast of characters. So you're at NOPA now. I know you're new, but part of that change was the rapid expansion we had in the soybean crush industry. How do you think, which EPA ignored, you could argue, or at least mostly ignored last time? Is that one of the messages you'll be bringing forward?
Absolutely. I mean, the soybean crushing industry is expanding rapidly. There's about 30% increase in what we're crushing domestically, and hopefully we continue to grow that. I mean, we grow about 4 billion bushels of soybeans here in the U.S. We crush half of them domestically. The rest we export as whole soybeans. But I mean, the message we've always been preaching from the onset of the renewable fuels industry is, let's add the value here. So the more we can do here, crush the soybeans, use the meal here for livestock and export it, and then add value to that oil. And that's why the RVOs are so important, because while half of that oil goes into the food supply, half of it is used for biodiesel, and that's an increasing percentage. And from my members' perspective, the single most important issue is getting those RVO numbers higher.
I've heard that a lot from different producers. Is that what you're hearing? Is it RVOs? I mean, sometimes we take it for granted because the RFS has been around since 2005, the RFS 2 since 2007. But I think we'd be remiss if we took our eye off the ball that it is a demand driver. We're going to talk, I know we got some questions here, and I'm going to work those in on the tax side, on maybe more of the production side. But as I mentioned this morning, we need demand drivers. So what do you think?
I mean, I've been saying this, and for folks who've seen me on panels for the last 6 months, I mean, this is my number one thing is there's a lot of things that people have gotten wrapped around the axle a bit on tax, and we need to work on this and that. But the solver of all ills, in my view, is the RVOs. And if the pie's big enough, a lot of the other issues go away. And the other issues present themselves in the absence of the demand signal. And the demand signal has not been there. And that's been the overarching, the sword of Damocles over the industry for the last 2 years, is the RVOs just being totally insufficient. So to the extent, given the big issues that we're going to see in the next couple of years with this administration, whether it's around trade, what happens with SREs, we got to be singularly focused on message on RVOs got to go up, and it helps everybody across the board. And there's no disagreement there in the renewable fuels industry.
Yeah, I think we can all nod our heads. I think that if the RFS is big enough, and when we say RVOs, I forgot, I'm supposed to be the acronym police. That's just the acronym for the RFS blending levels, renewable volume obligations. But that's the RFS blending levels that they set for each year. Yeah, so I think we all agree on that. What's nerve-wracking is, will they be? Because obviously the EPA blew it last time. So Devin. I think maybe Donnell mentioned it earlier. We'll come back and get your opinion too this morning. But we're in a new world order under what we call SET. If you don't know what that means, you don't have to. But we're in a period of the RFS where the EPA has more flexibility to do things that they want to do, and it wasn't as prescribed year after year by Congress. So in this rule that we're under now, that was unfortunately way too low, it was a 3-year rule. I've heard talk about, hey, we should go for another 3-year rule. We should go for a 2-year rule. Have you guys talked about that? Or do you guys have any opinions on whether you want to see maybe a little longer or a little shorter RVO?
If the volumes are high, we want it as long as possible. And if they're too low, we want it as short as possible.
That is a great I told you these were DC insiders, man. They got it figured out. Anthony, you represent, you work on this with a lot of different clients from a lot of different perspectives. Are you hearing one thing or different things?
No, it's the same thing. Like everyone's kind of in that middle ground space of like, if we feel like we can get them to make the step change that is required to get us back to where the industry is producing across the board, then yeah, we want the certainty. I mean, you balance that with, is it like an early Trump 1 situation, or is it year 3, year 4 Trump administration? And not knowing that yet, really. I mean, the players are still getting in their seats. We're still trying to figure out where it's going to go. People aren't really ready to commit. 2 is kind of where you hear it across the board is, I think that's probably where people sit. The problem is they did a 3-year rule when we were doing all this expansion. Biodiesel plants, renewable diesel plants, crush plants, they were all coming online. Now we have a lot more certainty, right? Most of the steel's all on the ground. We kind of know where expansion numbers are, so it should be easier to be more certain for a longer term. But
Well,
do you want them to have 2 bites at the apple, or do you want to have them have 1 bite at the apple?
well, then I'll use the Devin line and say, tell me who the next president is. And I'll tell you how I feel about Trump having 2 bites at the apple. But you mentioned your November meeting, Danelle. I was there. I also heard the EPA talk about, there's not all this certainty. We don't, that now Europe's doing some things, and so that might divert feedstocks and blah, 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 blah. So what has your board taken a position on 2 or 3, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, we would be along with Devin's theory of thinking here, right? If they can get it right. We told them this the last time, though, because we knew the last time they were going to do 3 years.
Yeah.
And the answer was, we're comfortable with that if you get it right. And we were concerned if they got it wrong, which they did, how detrimental it would be, not just for 1 year. We've had the EPA get it wrong on a year-by-year basis before. And the industry sorts its way through it and figures their way through it, and it all becomes okay. But getting it wrong 3 years in a row is been really dampening for investment and for confidence, I think, in the industry. And so 3 years would be great if they can be aggressive in those numbers and give the industry a vision of growth and everybody to be able to see that. Keep in mind, it looks like by the time they set it, they will be bumping up somewhere close to the first year anyway.
Yeah.
And so it would seem likely it's going to be 2 or 3, just because they probably don't want to turn around and go through that same exercise again.
Yeah. Kevin, do farmers agree that a higher RVO is a top priority? Is that, or is there something else that they're looking at to drive demand?
I think we would look at, yes, RVO is very important, but I want to give a little commentary on the RVOs. I always look at it through the lens of, from leverage, do they want to deal with it in midterms or an election cycle or an off year? So I always kind of want to balance those things out when I look at things like this. And where can we get our most leverage out? Because sometimes during the midterms, you can get them to kind of do some things they don't want to do with an election pending. Our farmer priority in RVOs, yes, absolutely. But also our farmers' vision, we'll get into long-term economic benefits like SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and so forth. We really see a future of having low-carbon biofuels as the future, not only for corn growers, but for the state of Iowa.
Okay, right. Yeah, I would say, yeah, if we knew the future, it'd be good. But you actually bring up a good point. We need to do something that does not cycle so that there needs to be an RVO finalized in the same fall that there's a presidential election. I hadn't really thought about the midterms, but so maybe we need a 2-3. I'll admit, and this is, I want to be very clear, so I see some of my board members out there, this is just Monty Shaw talking on a panel. It's not the official position of the board, but after getting burned last time, I have to admit I'm leaning toward 2, because when was the last time the EPA leaned in on a RFS blending level? And I'd like to think with the new coalition, I'd like to believe that. So, yeah, but I'm just like, because like you say, if they get it wrong, then the longer they have it wrong, that certainty doesn't, it just is certain that it's bad for a long time. That certainty doesn't really help. So,
well,
yeah,
and the dynamic we have this time that we didn't have the last time when you were doing annual RVOs, back to Kevin's point, is SREs.
Yeah.
Is if we get a proposal and a final, God forbid, before EPA decides how they're going to adjudicate 139 SREs, much less going forward, then we're beholden for 3 years maybe without any avenue for restitution. There's no new rulemakings. So the timing on SRE policy with the RVOs, I think, is really important that we understand how they're going to deal with that before we get a multiple-year RVO.
Yeah, that actually takes us right into the next question. Just, and you actually brought it up first, Kevin. You know, the big RVO is great, but if you set it at X and you let Y out the back door through these things called small refinery exemptions, you might hear us use the phrase SRE for that, then it's really not that big. The Trump administration, Devin, if you want to start with this one, the Trump administration just took action on the Supreme Court case that had to do with some SREs. A lot of people are thinking that means they're going to go back and maybe reverse the denials that the Biden administration had. How many SREs are sitting out there, and do you think they're going to get granted? Because there have been some other court decisions too which have not gone in our favor on SREs.
Well, Anthony already answered it. There's 139 sitting out there.
All right, sorry, I'm reading questions. I'm trying to do.
We were talking about this at lunch and double checking.
I stole your
numbers.
numbers.
So that's fine. Luckily, Anthony negotiated with the last Trump administration on how to bring these back in. So I'll let him talk about how that's going to work this time around.
Yeah, well, we were going to ask that. Like, you know, we had this reallocation agreement. So basically, if you granted SREs, you had to then account for them in the RVO levels, and essentially what it did is okay, some small refiners got the get out of jail free card, but the overall numbers stayed the same. Those numbers were just divided amongst the obligated parties that did not get SREs. And so that was fine by us, so is that going to hold? Is he going to stick with it? Is he going to welch? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing that came out of that process was I think the president came to a very good understanding of the concern that we had, which is the RVOs, if you remember, were meaningless in the Trump administration. And we made the point to him, I used the egg parable. It's like going to the store and buying a dozen eggs and coming home and finding there's 9 in there. And that's essentially what they would do. They'd set the RVOs, then they'd do the SREs. And so the market wouldn't trade on RVOs anymore. They would trade on the SREs that came after the fact. So, but the problem that we have is that there's two different buckets we're dealing with. What we negotiated at the end of the Trump administration was they would estimate going forward what SREs would be granted based on an average, a 3-year rolling average, and put it back into the baseline. We have 139 SREs pending that are in arrears. It's not a forward-looking thing. So we need to make sure that if they grant any of these retrospective SREs from 2016 through today, that those there's restitution for that if they do put RINs back into the market or et cetera. But then going forward, we need to make sure that if their policy changes, again, knowing that they have to make sure that that formula, which by the way was litigated against by the oil industry, they tried to get that deal we made with the Trump administration out of the annual rulemakings. The court upheld it. So it is a legally defensible position that they need to do this. We've been reminding them of that from the get-go, and we're just going to need to continue to remind them of that as we go through this process, that, hey, you agreed to do this for us the last time. We expect you to hold to that to make us whole. And that's the main thing, is we just need to be made whole. Whatever they want to do, whatever, but the RVOs need to be binding, and that's the most important thing.
They might have different tools for those that are pending going forward. They might need to be creative and have some different tools for the ones that are out there going backwards. But yeah, if you dump 4 billion RINs into the RIN market, it doesn't matter what you set the RVOs at for a few years. Do you guys agree?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to move on. We're going to, and I've got some questions on here I'm going to work in. So let me go to Kevin here. Some of you guys were answering some of my questions, so I had this all set up, so I was going to go in a nice order.
We're doing that purposefully.
And they're all just messing with me. It's pretty good. So Kevin, ag groups fought hard to be part of a low carbon solution within the clean fuels production tax credit called 45Z. In the last days, the Biden USDA put out a carbon smart, climate smart agriculture proposal. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Is it still even alive, or is it DOA? In fact, I was so busy getting ready for this, I read a story that maybe it didn't get put in the Federal Register. So it
got published.
It did? Okay. So what's your take on, did you like it, and what's its status?
We did like it, and I just want to let the audience know that Iowa Corn put a ton of effort in with our National Corn Office on providing comments and expertise with tons of people at Iowa Corn with a PhD behind their name that really got their teeth into this and submitted these comments into USDA to get the government to acknowledge of the hard work that the farmers not only can do in the future, but have been doing in the past on carbon smart agriculture and climate smart agriculture for that matter. Farmers have been, like, they're way ahead of the game. And what we try to communicate to USDA is we've been doing this. Yeah. Farmers have been doing this for 40 years. It's just not like, we're just not showing up here now to the picnic. And so I think the USDA did take that into consideration in the internal meetings we had with them. We got the fog to clear for them, like, oh, you guys have been doing this, wow, X, Y, and Z, and then what we can continue to do in the future. So we liked the rule that came out because it acknowledged what the American farmer has been doing in the whole climate smart agriculture realm.
We're going to dig further into 45Z, but just staying for a second. Any other thoughts on the climate smart agriculture rule or in general that anybody wants to hit?
I mean, I think it's critically important that agriculture is recognized as providing that opportunity for decarbonization. I mean, it starts there. The renewable fuels industry starts with agriculture. Yep. So to have the federal government try to make things a little bit easier and a little more rational for how farming actually happens, I think is a good step. I think there's still work to be done to make that better and easier as well, but I think it's good that that recognition is there, that agriculture and renewable fuels continue to both play a critical role together in decarbonization.
And I'm going to use my righteous indignation moment here.
You get one.
We've spent so many years getting dinged by indirect land use change and all these other things, and never recognition for the good things that the industry has had. And it's time, instead of us being penalized constantly for nothing, for what people do around the world, not here at home, that the benefit now accrues to the farmer in the U.S.
Absolutely, yes. Big round of applause there. Yeah, so, speaking for the IRFA board, we felt it was a step in the right direction from an earlier version that was rolled out as part of a different tax credit. It recognized more practices, but we still think it was hamstrung by some of the internal conflicts in the Biden administration with some of the environmental constituencies that they had. So, I've heard two different rules, like, well, Trump's not going to care about the climate or carbon, so this is going to be DOA. But I think he likes farmers. And I think if farmers go out and make the case to him that, this isn't about even necessarily U.S. policy. This is about having the United States say, hey, we're going to recognize the good work of farmers. This model could be adopted by private carbon markets. It could be adopted by state carbon markets. We could use it with some of our export customers and say, look, you need to take this into consideration because you care about carbon, and here's our government's official position on this. So my personal take is that we need to keep pushing on this, get more of the practices recognized, make sure they get the full credit, and keep going on this, because it is a way to, as you said, reward the farmers.
Yeah, I think it was positive momentum, and it was encouraging to see them unbundle it and add more practices. But just to add a point of clarity, in case you didn't read the several hundred pages of regulations that came out toward the end of January, it's specifically not included in 45Z until there is additional action from Treasury.
That's right.
So it's sitting separately on hopefully a path that could merge at some point.
Yeah. So Danelle, digging deeper into 45Z itself then, the Biden Treasury issued intent. I've heard different things like that was published in one journal but not some other journal, and how enforceable is that intent? So maybe you can clarify that. But I also have seen, had a lot of conversations on the side of your guys' great conference a few weeks ago in San Diego, where it was at least, 5 or 6 degrees warmer. There's still a lot of confusion. There's still a lot of uncertainty. There's still a lot of hesitancy to go forward and claim the tax credit based on what was put out. It feels to me like we're not necessarily neutral, but it still feels to me like biomass-based diesel is, at least the clutch is slipping still, and we could use some extra guidance. But do you agree, or do your experts say, no, we've got a path forward? What are you guys saying?
Well, I think what originally came out, we were concerned because it was sort of like a notice of intent to propose a rule kind of a deal, and that doesn't sound extremely serious, but we knew it was a serious attempt, but it has since made it into the IRS bulletin, so that, my understanding, that makes it a much more official and probably easier to count on from a tax perspective.
Okay.
But there's no doubt about it. I mean, there needs to be a formal rule proposed and finalized, and it's another one of those sooner rather than later moments for the industry. Because there is a lack of clarity, and I think if our biofuel producers that I've talked to even here have said they are getting some pushback from the marketplace saying, are you sure that's like you think it is, and are you sure we can make this deal this way? And so anything that we can get from the Trump administration sooner rather than later to put some meat on that bone there and let the marketplace feel good about it. It doesn't matter whether I feel good about it or not. But whether the marketplace can feel good about that transaction on both sides. And keep in mind,
Absolutely.
that credit is no longer a cash, payment back to the producer or to the blender. I mean, it's now in the form of a tax credit against tax obligations. And so if you don't have a tax obligation, you're now finding a secondary market to buy that credit from.
They've got to be certain enough.
Yeah, I mean, and they've got to be certain. So there's layers of complexity that's been added all the way through with 45Z that still is going to take a little bit of time to sort out.
Maybe I'll use my moment of righteous indignation and just say,
That's your life.
yeah, 45Z. I think there's a reason I think there's a reason we got Z. And it's like, now someone told me there was another one, but I'm going to ignore that fact and just say this. It's like the only IRA tax credit they didn't get done. And it just frustrates me because if we had certainty and clarity with the they knew the end of administration was coming, they should have got this done. They could have gotten this done. And it's extremely frustrating to see an industry that's so vital to agriculture, to Iowa's economy, the Midwest economy, and that can do so much good on reducing all kinds of emissions from tailpipe to carbon to you name it, and is just not able to operate at full capacity at what it could do because of this. And so there's my little moment.
Well, Monty, I think it's, to think about how long it's taken them to get where they landed, which is not very far from where they started. I think it's an indication, though, of how complex this issue was and is when you think about agriculture and climate and carbon reduction and all of those elements coming together and just what was going on within this last administration. So I think it's a point for all of us to take that not everybody views renewable fuels as something that's great and should be supported. So we all have to sort of double down on our efforts to educate and to advocate and to be unapologetic about that when we're talking with our legislators and regulators. Don't assume that they're on your team. I mean, they may be saying things from the tippy top of the administration, but at the agency level, that may not be what's going on. And so we have a responsibility in all that going forward. So
Yeah, there were clearly constituencies that
Absolutely.
did not want farmers involved in this, did not want to give farmers any credit. They totally dismiss any carbon benefit from changing farm practices, and just even, like you said, even the benefit of biofuels in general. I think that's true. Devin, part of the Treasury notice that we just talked about, at least temporarily, said that imported feedstocks would not qualify. What is NOPA's take on that?
So NOPA, again, we represent soybean crushers located in the United States, and so we want to see first and foremost demand for our soybean oil to go into biofuels. A little bit of clarification on that, it excluded imported used cooking oil to be used for on-road biodiesel and renewable diesel. It still can be used for making sustainable aviation fuel.
That's true.
But in general, NOPA was pleased to see some limitations on imported feedstock to make sure that domestic soybean oil is used first. Now, unfortunately, some of the carbon intensity scoring did not treat soybean oil that well, particularly as it goes into renewable diesel, but also to biodiesel. So there's definitely work to be done in this space as well. And look, my members also represent canola, some of which comes out of Canada. So it's not, again, it's a complicated topic. It's not easy to just draw the line. Maybe we need to look at North America more holistically, or maybe Canada becomes the 51st state, and that just solves
Either way,
it for us.
there you go. There's two ways to solve the problem right there.
Yep.
I think. Any other thoughts on the notion of imported feedstocks versus domestic feedstocks?
Well, I mentioned this morning, you knew I was going to jump in, didn't you?
thought-
You didn't even look over here.
Here's,
I was
no, no. To be honest, I was going to get to you. I wanted to see if I could
oh.
fake him out and
I'll let
pressure to answer.
I'll let you look that way a
I'm
little longer.
not jumping on that group.
Yeah, yeah. I knew you weren't. I just wanted to make you feel guilty that you weren't. So now, Danelle, please.
No, I mentioned this morning this quandary we find ourselves in, as an industry. We've grown to 5 billion gallons, and as I mentioned, we've got about 3.6 billion gallons worth of domestic feedstock when you look at what I call the big five. And so we are utilizing and want to utilize all the domestic feedstock we can get. But our quandary is, do we stop there or do we continue to grow? And if we continue to grow, which is what I believe we need to do, imported feedstocks are going to play a role in that and have to. So we're excited about the soybean crush expansion, about 1 billion gallons worth of oil or somewhere close to that. So that's really going to be a nice big push, but there's still going to need to be imported feedstocks. And so I think the conversation needs to center around how do we make that work where it's fair for everybody. We're a domestic industry, a domestic trade association as well. We do not want to do anything to undermine domestic soybean production, soybean processing at all. But at the same time, we feel like we're reaching a relevance. We're now 10% of the diesel pool in the United States, biodiesel and renewable diesel. So we're reaching this relevance level where markets that were historically ambivalent to us, think of rail and marine, are now like, hey, we want to sit down and talk about this because you can be this immediate help for us in our decarbonization efforts. But if at the end of the day they feel like we've got a lid on us that's not going to include them, then they're going to be forced to move on. So that's the quandary that we're in, and we're working very hard with NOPA to try to sort our way through all that and figure out how we can jointly make all of this work. And I'm confident we'll get that all figured out.
Yeah, as Chris, our IRFA president, mentioned this morning, we have a very diverse set at our state level trade association, from ethanol to biodiesel to renewable diesel to SAF to RNG to cellulosic ethanol, and so when we had a discussion at our annual meeting in December about this, it was very interesting, very robust, and we appreciate that. That's actually a compliment to our members that they're willing to do that, and yeah, we ended up not supporting. At that time, there were calls for complete bans on imported feedstocks. I will say this was not a unanimous position. It was not a unanimous position, but where the most of our members coalesced was there's not anything inherently wrong with taking and importing a feedstock and adding value to it here, creating that economic opportunity, those jobs and different income streams here. But if it's happening at the expense of a domestic industry, then that's the problem. And that was the challenge from the low RVOs combined with the new carbon scoring and how they were penalizing ag commodities with indirect land use change and different things. That seemed to be kind of what happened. So we do feel there's ways to address this problem without having a blanket wall up around the United States. And so hopefully we can get people together and come up with some of those more creative things. We got a question from the audience here. I'm going to take a shot at answering it, and then Anthony, who's the smartest one up here, I think.
That's how I get beaten up when I walk off the stage, Mike.
Look, I wanted to see which one. I want to see which one of the other three gave me the dirtiest look. Is why I said that. No, but seriously, we got a question. Why are we talking about 45Z? Isn't it paused because Trump put out an executive order pausing a lot of the actions regarding the so-called Inflation Reduction Act? My answer on that is no. We don't live in a monarchy, so he was elected. He can do certain things with executive orders that direct what agencies do and don't do for a period of time. He cannot unappropriate money. He cannot change tax law. The IRA is law. And so there were like grant programs, like, hey, we're going to give out billions of dollars for EV grants for whether it was cars or factories or charging stations. If that money is not out the door, they can slam the door on that and reevaluate it. But you cannot unilaterally change the tax law. Now, as we've said, while the law won't change, if we don't exactly know how to claim it because of the rules, that's a problem. But no, and that's actually a question I've gotten a lot. So I'm glad whoever sent that in. Thank you, because there were a lot of people that just thought, with the stroke of a pen, the entire Inflation Reduction Act was gone. Am I semi-correct?
Yeah, I mean, I know Donnell and those guys have done a lot of work on this too. I think there's a lot of question on this. The tax credits were all in this big list that circulated in the press about all the reviews. All the agencies were going to have to review all their funding, and it included the tax provisions that were in there. And then they rescinded the memo from OMB, but they still have a freeze on the money. I think the one thing that is a little fuzzy is the direct pay provisions. So money that is actually paid out directly to people who claim direct pay on the tax credits. That's a little unknown, I think, at this point. But by and large, yeah, you claim it as against your tax, your income tax, and so it's not a grant or a loan or a direct funding stream. So I have the same assessment on that.
So direct pay on 45Q could be impacted, but not 45Z?
Potentially.
So we've got to move on. Time is going. You guys are digging in great, so I hope you guys are enjoying this level of detail. One quick question from the audience before we go, Devin. Basically, I'm going to summarize it here. It's pretty long, but with the 45Z GREET model, do the guidelines incentivize or disincentivize the use of soybean oil for production of renewable diesel or biodiesel?
Yeah, as I mentioned briefly, it doesn't treat soybean oil as well as many of the other feedstocks. Danelle had a chart up earlier. It shows distillers corn oil is treated very well. Tallow and domestic UCO is treated very well. So soybean oil is at a disadvantage to some of these other feedstocks. So we're going to work to try and get parity there, whether it's through fixing aspects of the GREET model or eliminating ILUC or other aspects like that to make sure that soybean oil is treated more fairly.
We've told the Iowa delegation, whenever you handle tax on this, just get rid of ILUC. We don't have to let an unelected bureaucrat who doesn't like farmers tell us that there's this imaginary penalty that 20 years of data would strongly suggest does not exist. So why, you're Congress, do your job.
Well, and this is why Climate Smart Ag is also so important, right? If they connect Climate Smart Ag to 45Z, now you have carbon intensity numbers that you can help bring it down and level the playing field. So it doubles down on the importance of connecting those two pieces so that, again, more can be done on the agriculture side to level that out.
As opposed to the waste products and
Correct.
stuff. Again, nothing wrong with that,
Right.
but don't disadvantage
Right.
the ag products.
Yeah, I think that's a point worth making again. I mean, to me, that is the most important thing that we in the soy world need to be working hard on. Indirect land use change, I mean, that's a penalty California came up with 25 years ago, and the federal government decides they're going to use it as well. And I've sort of given CARB a little bit of a benefit of the doubt because they were implementing a brand new policy, low carbon fuel standard. They really weren't sure what was going to happen by incentivizing all these new fuels to come in. So they modeled it and said this land use change could happen. But they took a very global look at that. And as you mentioned, Monty, we now have 20 years worth of real life data to show that U.S. soybean farmers are producing more beans, therefore more oil, on less acres than they were when this started. Therefore, there is no indirect land use change. So let's quit with the penalties, because that indirect land use change penalty is the biggest penalty against soy in the CI scoring.
Yeah.
If that goes away, I think it solves a lot of the angst that we have about all the feedstocks. And also, it's just the right and fair and just thing to do for soy.
All right, we are going to switch into rapid mode. There's no way I'm going to get to all these questions. So we're going to just go around and give us your best elevator answer. We had a trade panel this morning, but those guys were traders. You guys are DC policy insiders. So Trump pursues, as Trump pursues his trade policy with the heavy dose of tariffs, or at least a heavy dose of talking about tariffs, what can and should the biofuels industry do? Do you want to start us off, Kevin?
Not back down. I mean, plead your case, be Iowa nice, but be firm and keep the pressure on.
Well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of exported products in our industry. I know ethanol is exported as well. So I'm kind of one of those big open market kinds of guys. And so I'm watching very closely what impacts tariffs and threats of tariffs have. But nothing typically lands without a retribution by the other country. So
Yeah.
I like to have open markets all the way around.
Devin, anything you want to say?
I mean, I think there's opportunities to use it to our advantage. Say, if we're losing external markets, we need to create more demand at home, and the quickest way to do that for agriculture is through biofuels policy.
Yep.
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 Okay, that was quick.
I'll let you wrap
Your
it.
smartest guy just
Okay.
said, yeah.
We'll just go to Danelle. Danelle, we'll just move this way. Farm Bill, CFAA priorities in the Farm Bill.
You know, there's a bioenergy program that's been a part of that for a long time. Doesn't always get funded, so I think that's kind of for us in the biomass-based diesel industry, that would be a critical thing for smaller producers of our fuels to be able to take advantage of.
Okay. NOPA?
I'm 9 days into this job. We're focused on RVOs and 45Z and 40A. So
Okay.
I'll get back to you on the Farm Bill priorities.
For your clients, what are you hearing?
It's kind of across the board. Yeah, I mean, it's not a lot different, I think. Yeah.
We would like to see MAP and FMD funding for our trade programs at USDA
Stole my
be doubled. It's been stuck at the same levels for like 20 years, and with inflation and so forth, and it's a 25-to-1 return on investment that we have studied in ad nauseum and proven to Capitol Hill that it is very worth the bang for the buck. And the Hill is listening, but we do know that there is a $36 trillion elephant in the room. And I believe, though, that we're on solid footing on MAP and FMD funding. We're getting that increased.
Obviously, there's big Title I, different things that you guys will be working on, but so for our little world, that's our number one. We have some others. But Devin, a question here from the audience. There's been tremendous growth in soybean oil, crush facilities, but we just got through talking about all this uncertainty. There's still, as much as we've had, there's still some on the books, right? Do we see that moving forward? Or is the ramp up over and it's going to level off? Is there anything that you can say about what your industry views as their next 4 or 5 years?
The biggest thing our industry is looking for is certainty. Certainty from strong RVO numbers, certainty from tax policy. That'll dictate what the continued expansion of the soybean crushing industry will rely on.
Okay, Anthony, RNG.
Yes.
You're my RNG expert. So we have growing interest here. We have a couple of producers. Obviously, around the country in different places, we have low carbon fuel standard. There's even more going on. We're hoping that, we're seeing it in cattle here. There's technology being worked on that might make it cost effective in the hog industry with their size and scope, which would be really exciting in Iowa. We have biomass producers that are taking corn stover and turning it into RNG right now. Could be a cover crop, could be other things. What are you seeing with RNG and some of these different tax credits and RVOs and kind of everything we've talked about, but put your RNG hat on?
Yeah, I'll try and be as
You
quick
have
as I can.
12 seconds.
Yeah,
We're going to go long. We're getting that
our-
in 2 minutes.
RNG took the biggest hit at the end of the year, in my view. They basically rejiggered the GREET modeling of RNG and the carbon benefit of it. Totally hammered livestock-based RNG in particular. But I've always viewed this as RNG Super Bowl. There's so many different opportunities for it, but they closed a lot of doors at the end of the Biden administration. Like you can't use it to decarbonize your ethanol or biodiesel plant under 45Z unless it's directly connected to the plant. So you can't use book and claim. There was a lot of excitement about the hydrogen market. They basically said you can't use it in hydrogen because there's no book and claim, and they jammed people on the carbon intensity scoring. The ITC expired at the end of the year.
ATC.
The investment tax credit, sorry.
Acronym,
Thank you.
please.
So I still think there's huge opportunities for RNG for people who can make it at the plants. Still think there's a lot of markets, and I think we have an administration here who will look very fondly on RNG and maybe look at fixing a lot of these issues that were left on the table. There's not a lot that has to be done, but it could have huge benefits for this industry if they just fix a couple of things that they did at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, book and claim alone opens up whole new.
That's a big one.
So I'm hearing frustration, but actually optimism
Yes.
with the new administration. On
Frustration and optimism.
All right, well, I'm down to where I only have 172 audience questions left, but we're out of time. I wanted to ask them who their most favorite Trump nomination was so far and who their least favorite was to try to get them in trouble, but we ran out of time.
Darn.
So with that, can you join me in giving a big round of applause to these folks?
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.